Thank you everyone for joining. We have an hour of bike packing conversations. This is going to be a packed hour, so stick around. I'm your host, Galen Mook. I'm the Executive Director of Mass Bike. We're the Massachusetts Bicycle Coalition. We do statewide bike advocacy, which is legislation, policy work, funding, kind of the broader picture stuff. But we like to encourage the local level. We like to inspire. We like to engage. We like to really get literally you out on two wheels, whatever way we can. So what we're going to be doing today is talking about going out on a long bike packing trip. We have some great guests. We have Kristen Sykes out in Northampton, who is representing the Appalachian Mountain Club and also our pioneer or Connecticut River Valley chapter president of our advocacy organization at Mass Bike. And Jamie Lent, who did the Bay Circuit Trail, which is a 230-mile kind of arc loop that's, I think it's Lowell to Duxbury. Does that sound about right? No.
No, it's Plum Island. You're cutting off a big piece of it.
Oh man, you're right. You're right. Get the whole rest of the Merrimack there.
Yeah, don't leave out the North Shore, dude. I think there's some North Shore NEMBA folks on here. So.
I appreciate that. Yeah, it's. I will say it's. We're gonna hear some stories and see some pictures from Jamie and hear about the trail with Kristen. We're also gonna start with a presentation by Adventurous Cycling. They sent out a kind of a DIY presentation that I'll jump into in just 1 second. And it'll be pretty brief. It's kind of a how-to, a primer of getting out on two wheels for overnight bike trips. And I want to encourage all of you who are joining us to put your questions, your thoughts, your stories as they fit in the chat, which should be down on the bottom. We also have a Q&A. So if you have like a distinct question that you want to throw down that we'll actually answer, there's two different ways of engaging with us, the chat and the Q&A. I think Kristen and Jamie, you can probably see both of these, I hope.
Yes, I can, though I'm not going to be able to keep up with them if I'm talking.
Don't worry about it. This is the multiple roles. Cool. And yeah, and I guess we'll just kind of jump right in. We are recording this as well. So I'll put this on the Mass Bike YouTube and we'll send this out. Oh, that's my cat Henry in the background. He might be the star of the show as well. So we are recording this, so just for posterity's sake. And I guess we'll just jump right in. Kristen, I'll do a quick introduction for you, if that's all right.
Sure, absolutely.
I've lost where you sent me your bio, my apologies.
That's okay.
So Kristen Sykes, she's the director of the Southern New England Conservation Projects and Partnerships for the Appalachian Mountain Club, and she has worked there for over 15 years. Kristen oversees the protection and maintenance of the Bay Circuit Trail and Greenway. Thank you so much, Kristen, for that dedicated work. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Nope, just that I wear multiple helmets, as we were saying, and also happy to be affiliated with Mass Bike and really psyched to have these two things come together. So thanks for putting this together.
Awesome, our pleasure. And Jamie Lent, who, when I asked to send me a bio, Jamie just said, I am an average bike rider or something along those lines. I don't know, Jamie, if you want to just unmute yourself and do a 30-second intro.
Yeah, my name's Jamie Lent. I live, split my time between the Boston area and Vermont, and I lead rides out of Ride Studio Cafe in Lexington, a evening mixed terrain ride, and try to spend as much time of mine as possible out in the woods and likewise. Excellent.
Cool. Great. And we'll hear stories and see photos of Jamie's trip that he took in 2019. Great. So I'm just going to jump right in. So the first thing I'm going to do is share my screen to a adventure cycling guide to bike overnight. Let me get rid of my soundtrack here. Cool. So let me know if you can see this. Is this still looking okay? Cool.
Yes.
So the point of this webinar here is to really inspire you to get out, but also make a little bit of a how-to. So the folks at Adventure Cycling, they're a nationwide bike touring organization. Some of the premier maps and some of the premier stories that are coming out about cycling across the country are from Adventure Cycling. Their promotion of the US bicycling route system, as well as the bike overnights and bike your park days. So we'll learn a little bit about adventure cycling through this PowerPoint presentation. So there are over 53,000 members with routes and maps and tours and magazines, and there's all sorts of resources that encourage you to get out and ride. The beauty of attending today's webinar is that you will actually be offered a free membership to Adventure Cycling. So what I'll be able to do is in the RSVP link, as we send a thank you with a YouTube for this video, we'll have a link where you can join Adventure Cycling, which I highly recommend you doing. It's at no cost to you, and you'll receive the Adventure Cyclist magazine every month, which is such an inspiring and great way to get you to think about doing overnights on bikes. So what we're going to talk about today is a little bit of how to do it, and then we'll jump right into folks who have done it. And I'm going to fly through this. I'm going to share these slides afterwards. So if you miss a slide, don't worry, we'll jump right back in. The beauty of bicycling overnights is that it is easy, especially in the time of COVID. Everybody's feeling a little bit cooped up. The beauty of going out by bike, especially to the outdoors, the great outdoors, is that you can actually physically distance pretty darn easy by bike. And what we're going to go through a little bit is you don't really need too much specialty equipment, too much experience, and you can even stay close to home. So for those of you in the greater Boston area, the Bay Circuit Trail is a gem, which you'll learn about. How to start? The first thing we'll recommend is just finding time and marking it out on your calendar. Take off from work, make sure your auto replies are all set, pump your tires, grease that chain, and head out. We've got some dates that you should throw on your calendar, including a bike the park day and a bike overnight weekend. So we'll get to those in a minute. So how to register for the bike weekend? Adventure Cycling is doing that. I believe it's in June, so it's just a couple weeks away. So the bike weekend, go to adventurecycling.org and register your trip. There are trips all across the country that are happening for Bike Your Park Day. I was actually in Virginia near the Shenandoah Skyline Drive last Bike Your Park Day. So I went out there and I was surrounded by other cyclists who were inspired to go out based off adventure cycling. So the cool thing about adventure cycling is that you are not alone out there. It gives you resources, but then it also gives you shared encouragement. And if you are part of adventure cycling, you register your ride, you'll get a chance to win some cool prizes like this sweet salsa adventure gravel bike and more. So where to do it? We want you to pick a spot to ride. Ideally, it's up to your comfort level. If you're a camper, you can think of campsites. If you're less than a camper and you want to do credit card camping, you can think of hotels and motels along the way. You could do warm showers. You could even do a little bit of couch surfing. There's even a specific side of Airbnb that goes towards outdoor spots, which I'll see if I can remember the name of and put in the resources link after this presentation as well. But the beauty of it is that you can really get out in the outdoors, especially in the time of COVID when crowds are discouraged. You can find your own little spot. And the beauty of being on a bike is that you can travel generally most places, assuming your equipment can handle it. And you can do so without needing to rely on others if you bring all of your own gear. You should really consider, some of the first considerations are how far you want to go. How far can you ride in a day? And it really depends a lot on the terrain. And we'll get into this with Jamie's presentation. The 230 miles on the Bay Circuit Trail comes in chunks. Some of it is paved. Some of it you have to trudge your bike through some marshes. Some of it you're really on mountain bikes there. But think about how you're going to ride. Is it on road? Is it off road? Is it going to be rugged? And base it off your ability, and not even just your ability, but your desire. You can go as little or as much as you want. I'll admit that sometimes when I'm bike packing, I'll only go about 30 miles a day because I like to enjoy the scenery. Maybe I've climbed 4,000 feet in those 30 miles. So it really kind of depends a lot on not just distance, but also elevation. Planning your route. So this is where adventure cycling really does come in handy. There are maps that go across the country. So if you check out Adventure Cycling, if you're an Adventure Cycling member, you get free access to all of their maps nationwide. And they can vary the maps based off not just geography, but also terrain, distance, scenery, and they have hotspots and markers along the way, including places to camp, places that are bike-friendly hotels, and good places to get a lot of ice cream. There are over 48,600 miles that are mapped as part of the adventure cycling routing system. You can see quite a bit in the Northeast area, but maybe this map, I could just keep it up for 30 seconds to inspire you that if you want to go across the country, you're not alone. There's probably going to be hundreds of riders this year who are utilizing adventure cycling maps to go across the country. So you can think, you can go as far, as little as you want, but just know that there are resources out there. And you can get little navigator apps as well, which follow your GPS. So you can not just have the paper maps, which are very handy. Sometimes you're in locations where you don't have batteries to charge or plugs to charge your batteries, or you don't have signal, so you might want to take a paper map. But then you can also base it off your GPS in the modern technological era. All right, let's get to the meat of it. The U.S. bicycling route system is something that MassBike is working on, although it's a little slow. We only really have one designated U.S. bicycling route in the state, and it's the Clare Saltonstall East Massachusetts road route, which essentially goes from Boston out to P-Town and utilizes a lot of the Cape and the Cape Cod Rail Trail as well. We're working on the clearance from the DOT, which can then allow us to work with municipalities to designate more U.S. bicycling route systems. There are a few that could be in the works. We're looking at the border to Boston, which would essentially be Newburyport down to Boston. We're looking east and west with the Mass Central Rail Trail. We're looking at the far, far edge with the Western New England Greenway, with the Ashwiltacook Pathway. So there's a lot that are in consideration to be part of the U.S. bicycling route system, but right now we really only have one. And a lot of that is because of advocacy. It's hard to get all 351 municipalities to start paying attention to something like a signage system. So the first step is to work with the DOT, get clearance, and then we're going to work on the local level. And then at that point, it comes down to funding and volunteers to actually designate where the signposts should go. I should also say that this does overlap with some other regional bike routes, including the East Coast Greenway, which cuts through and across Massachusetts with some of the most beautiful riding. The Mass Central Rail Trail, which when finished will be 110 miles from Boston Harbor all the way out to Northampton and then down to the Columbia Greenway. And so what we're talking about is a network of pathway systems.
And you can actually ride a bunch of the Mass Central Rail Trail right now. I rode from Amherst back to Boston in a day it was like 125 miles of all sorts of really cool trails and varying levels of paved and unpaved and still mostly just power line trails and that sort of thing. Oh, it was good fun.
That's so cool. That's great. And I will say that we're working on the Mass Central Rail Trail, the feasibility study, which has literally parcel by parcel of how the trail should be built, is supposed to be coming out from the DOT perhaps this month, perhaps next month. But with that feasibility study, you'll have a real map of what the Mass Central is, and then where the hotspots are that we need to focus our advocacy to really advance the trail.
And Galen, if I can add, the Mass Central Rail Trail also co-aligns with the Bay Circuit Trail in Wayland, I believe now, and Weston, and at some point Sudbury once that part gets done too. So all kinds of overlapping with the trail networks.
Excellent. Yep, it's happening. It's really happening. I'm very inspired actually with the potential for all of our trail systems to really interconnect. So stick around in the next couple of decades. It's really going to happen. So I'll jump through a few more just for the sake of time. The real encouragement that I want to say is you don't really need too much specialty equipment if you know what you're doing and if you've made proper plans. You do need to have the right bike. You do need to have a little bit of know-how. So in case you do get stranded, need to fix your own flat, need to do some minor repairs. But for the most part, especially, it's not too far out of the way for folks that are out there in case you do get stranded to, get support from local bike shops, get a ride share home, or find other ways of support. But we really just encourage you to find the lowest barrier of entry. And maybe even if it's just a one night overnight, you might not need to do a whole 230 miles. I'll leave this slide up for a second just to let you understand that there's different varieties of different levels of riding. You can do the fully loaded, which is full panniers, tents, and everything. You can go down to the bike packing, which is what we're really going to be focusing on with Jamie's conversation. If you're going to do the whole Bay Circuit, you need some suspension, you need some wider tires. If you're really going to go out for a while, you need to have some solid gear. Or you can go as light as just a credit card camping, which is just, put your credit card in. You've got restaurants that should at least be doing takeout. Motels might not be open currently, so you might want to do a little bit of pre-planning there. But you can go as light as you like as long as you know that there are resources along the way. I really enjoy this slide to kind of give you an understanding of not just the bike, the gear, but the style of riding that you may want to go with. Cool. Just to keep rounding us out, putting it all together, really it's finding the right gear, but you don't need that much specialty gear. So as an example here, you can just use kitty litter for panniers if you want to go that route. Maybe, maybe not, but it really is up to you. Just find whatever barriers you have, and we'll help you get over them. All right. So just to keep on moving, we're going to fly through a couple of these slides. Again, I'll share these afterwards. You do want to bring the essentials, just like if you were going to commute to work. You do want to be wearing cycling appropriate clothing. You want to be bright and visible. You want to make sure you have the essentials of the helmet, lights, and a lock, some good hydration. And everything else is done basically off personal preference and how much you want to dive deep into the camping world. Do recommend toiletries that you're going to set out with. For those of you who are hikers, you know, one of my biggest concerns when you're out there, just like we say if you're going to do a hiking overnight, is that cotton is not your best friend when you're out there. So maybe you want to think about moisture wicking clothing. You want to think layers. We are in New England, and especially if you're going to be doing any sort of terrain, you might be doing elevation changes. So keep all this stuff in consideration. And to route us out, you could go tent, you could go sleeping bag, you could go open air, you could do hotels, you could do motels. The variety depends on your comfort level. Food, of course, is up to your personal preference, but you're going to want to be downing a lot more calories than your normal daily intake, I would imagine. I recommend maple syrup packets as a great way to give a little bit of kick in the pants. There's great luxury and semi-luxury hotels and motels that are bike friendly. The Ruble map system did have, and I'll try to find this and dig this up for the resources too, a list of bike friendly hotels along their routing system, specifically along the Cape, but definitely in the Central Mass, Western Mass, and North Shore area as well. And one of the most important pieces is to remain safe. So make sure your bike is in working order. You might want to get a tune-up in advance. You might want to brush up a little bit on brake adjustments, on a little bit of know-how. You do want to be visible, especially if you're going to be riding in inclement weather or at night. And just general rules: obey all posted signage, obey all rules of the road. Make sure that you're doing just general best practices of common sense when you're out there. And lastly, we'll end it with this, just a free membership to Adventure Cycling. There's a ton of resources. I flew through these in a brief 12 minutes here. There's about 25 slides to this, so I'll share this afterwards. There's a lot of resources with Adventure Cyclists. I'll be sending out a link for you to join as a free member post this presentation. I think with that, I think I'm going to turn it back over, just for the sake of time, to Kristen, who can talk a little bit about the AMC Bay Circuit Trail and how it's going in terms of maintenance and ownership of the trail. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Galen. And I'm going to share my screen here. So I will pull this up. All right, good. See it? Okay, great. So thanks so much, Galen. My name is Kristen Sykes, and I work for the Appalachian Mountain Club in a small office in Western Massachusetts. I'm also an avid, primarily road cyclist, but just to talk a little bit, if you aren't familiar with the Appalachian Mountain Club, AMC, we are very old. We were founded in 1876 and promote the, can't see here, this little screen. Promotes the protection, enjoyment, and understanding of the mountains, forests, waters, and trails of America's Northeast. Probably most people who are familiar with the AMC think about the Appalachian Trail. We do maintain the Appalachian Trail in a lot of our region, which goes from DC to Maine, including we maintain the Appalachian Trail in Massachusetts. But we also have a whole system of huts that are in the White Mountains, but we also work on a lot of close to home trails. So I really had the privilege of working on the Bay Circuit Trail. We maintain the New England National Scenic Trail, which is in Worcester, Mass. And so work on a lot of close to home trails as well. So that is the AMC, our website, if you haven't been to it, and everyone thinks this is the coolest domain name, which we have because we're old, is outdoors.org.
Cool.
So as Galen mentioned, I've been at AMC a little over 15 and a half years, and have really been privileged to be able to work on the Bay Circuit Trail. For many, many years, the Bay Circuit Trail was run by volunteers. A wonderful gentleman who just turned 89 helped run an outdoor store in Andover and also worked on the Bay Circuit Trail. So AMC got involved. Well, we've been involved for a long time, but more formally got involved in 2012, where we helped lead the Bay Circuit Alliance, which is a number of different trail groups, municipalities, the federal government, on helping with the completion, enhancement, and long-term protection of the recreational trail and greenway. So we work with the Alliance to be able to fill in gaps. We do have a few gaps, recruiting and organizing volunteers. Most of the trail is maintained by volunteers. We do weekends when we're allowed to. We aren't at the moment, of course. We do monthly volunteer weekends. We work with a wonderful youth crew and work with a tremendous amount of volunteers. So just like a lot of our work with the AMC, a lot of the maintenance of the Bay Circuit is through volunteers, working on signage, and then of course working to make sure that we protect the trail. It goes through a lot of different municipalities, and I'll talk about that in a minute, and a lot of different landowners. I'm sorry if you can hear a loud noise, can you? My landlord is just taking this very opportunity to do some work in our basement, so I apologize for that. Okay, so the Bay Circuit Trail is 230 miles plus. And if you can see from this map, feel free to zoom in. It does start at Plum Island, and you can also visit the Parker River National Fish and Wildlife Refuge up there, which is fantastic. It does make a big arc, basically around 128 all the way down to Duxbury, Kingston Bay. And it is a wonderful idea that's been around since the 20s. One of the individuals who promoted this was a fellow named Benton Mackay, and if you're a trail geek, he's one of the godfathers of the Appalachian Trail and got inspired by the Long Trail. So the Bay Circuit Trail is kind of steeped in history. It is multi-use, which you'll find out more from Jamie. So 230 miles. You can see that the dotted line, we do have a little bit of a gap in Tewksbury-Billerica that we're working to complete, a little gap in Lowell, but overall the trail is complete, which is pretty exciting, especially since we're in a pretty urban suburban area. So again, 230 miles from Plum Island to Duxbury, Kingston Bay. I've done the whole thing over a couple years on foot, not on bike. And when you do hike it, or even if you hike it in your backyard, you realize that it really is this neat trail system that connects a number of conservation lands and trail networks. So we talked about the fact that it connects up with a number of other different trail systems. And so it's just a really cool way to be able to connect with different trail networks, and again, multi-use. It also provides outdoor recreation for over 4 million people living in the greater Boston area. And of course, people from Rhode Island, New York, New Hampshire. For a long time, one of my colleagues was calling it the Bay Secret Trail because most people hadn't heard of it. And as a lot of us are seeing right now from your home and want to get outside, we do have a really active Instagram and Facebook. And so if you go just look up Bay Circuit Trail on Instagram, you'll see all the photos. And I share a lot of photos too. So it's a great resource, and it passes through 37 towns. So lots of different towns you can go through. And I know Jamie's going to talk more about that because it is very diverse. And just to complete, and of course, if anyone has any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat or the Q&A. But if you do complete the whole Bay Circuit Trail, people have run it, people have biked it, people have hiked it, that you get this really snazzy end-to-end pin that you can show to all your friends. All you need to do is submit an essay and some photos, and I'll share those. So it is this really tremendous resource, and I really appreciate Galen letting me talk a little bit about the Bay Circuit Trail and this neat close-to-home recreation. And I'm really excited to hear more about Jamie's adventure on the Bay Circuit Trail via bike.
Excellent. Thank you, Kristen. It's really impressive, this Bay Circuit Trail, and I want to thank you for your stewardship and AMC for taking this over. We heard some Q&A beforehand about folks who had tried to do this route before the AMC had taken it over, which was a near impossibility. So I think what we're seeing is that through your organization's work is we are making a contiguous pathway, which is fantastic and something that will be an amenity for the whole public. I want to mention a few more things for folks. Feel free to chime into the chat with comments and the Q&A with questions. I just saw in the questions that the Adventure Cycling Bike Your Park weekend has been moved to September, the 25th to the 27th, which makes sense. Not really much is happening in June. And I'll be interjecting a little bit as Jamie's presentation carries forward. Jamie, can you take it away and jump into the meat, why people are here, what's with the Bay Circuit, and how was your trip?
Certainly. Let's see. Let me share the screen. All right. So, bikepacking the Bay Circuit Trail. As Kristen mentioned, you can hike it, you can ski it, you can do just about anything that's not motorized on at least most of this trail. And she also called it the Bay Secret Trail, which really resonated for me because I hadn't known about it until I stumbled across some trail signs along the way and started Googling, what is this Bay Circuit Trail thing that it says that I'm on? I'm just in a park that I usually ride in. So who am I? My name's Jamie Lent. I am pretty okay at bikes. I've been biking all my life, but mostly as transportation. I initially didn't really think of it as something fun. I just thought of it as how I got from A to B. And about 7 years ago, something like that, I dug an old mountain bike out of my basement that had been serving as a commuter bike in the snows of Vermont, and dragged it off into some woods and started riding and carrying it over logs and that sort of thing, and realized it was a lot of fun. So why am I giving you this talk? I got into the bike touring side of things when, for a birthday gift, my then girlfriend at the time had put together a route for us. I hadn't been backpacking in a long time, though I had as a kid. And together with some maps, some cue cards, I had a little bike computer. She called out the miles. I looked for when we made the turn, and we kind of bumbled our way around Rhode Island, had a grand old time of things. And since then, I've been going on ever crazier adventures, dragging people who are silly enough to follow me into, weirder and weirder places, and really haven't looked back ever since. So why did I do this trip? The Bay Circuit Trail is highs, it's lows, it's long slogs over rough pavement and craziness, but mostly it's these never-ending little ribbons of dirt for miles and miles and miles and miles. So I want to talk to you a little bit about some of the highlights. One of the best parts of bike travel are the random little things you find by the side of the trail. Maybe it's the way that you wake up in the morning to this beautiful view of a lake with these two little Adirondack chairs welcoming you out to spend slightly more time than you had planned getting going in the morning. Maybe it's a trailside library with books on the Boston Massacre and the Battle of Bunker Hill. And another book that we found along the way was the Revolutionary War, but unfortunately we lost the Revolutionary War. That one didn't make it to the end of the ride. There was a mailbox in the middle of the forest with some letters in it. Stream crossings. But I mean, one of the incredible things of this trail is that there's signage everywhere. A lot of the riding that we do in New England, there's lots of turns, lots of twists here and there. And if you're not following your GPS or you're not following somebody who knows where they're going, you're quite likely to get lost. The incredible thing on the Bay Circuit Trail is probably like 90% of the turns actually have signs. You'll see the Bay Circuit Trail logo there, and then also these white blazes that indicate whether you're going left or right at the turns. And so the majority of the time, you don't really need to be following your GPS. You can just watch for those signs. And I imagine if you're riding out in the woods, you will actually see these now that you know what you're looking for. They're everywhere. So the signs are great because you know that you're on course. You don't have to be constantly checking your GPS. That doesn't mean that you don't get lost. And that doesn't mean that just because there's a sign, you can actually make it through the trail. Here, that's the trail. So we ended up having to find our way around. Having maps is still helpful when this is what you come across. And sometimes the signs are just not that helpful. But so I saw some questions out there on how this, how you can ride this trail during pandemic. Clearly, my ride of this last year is actually a year from next weekend, on Memorial Day weekend. It's when we rode this. That's not a concern that we had. When businesses are open, there are an immense number of opportunities for transportation, which I'll get to, for food, for water, a fair number of places where you can sleep. But the key thing here, as with a lot of New England touring, is that you're never that far from food, which, as Galen mentioned, you're going to eat a lot of. I mean, we ate so very much food, nonstop eating. Clearly, if you're doing this ride now, that's going to be different, and I don't have any solutions for you there, but we can talk about that some later. The other thing that I mentioned was transportation. Looking at that map, there are so many opportunities to take a train or a bus out to the start of the ride, the end of the ride. You can break it up into pieces. If you have friends that want to do part of this with you, but not all of it, they can join part way. For this ride, there were, I believe, 3 of us did the entire ride together, but we had up to 8 or 9 people at any time who had joined for an overnight, part of a day. Some of them joined for 2 days. There were people of all different kind of appetites who wanted to, or had other commitments, but they were able to join for parts of it, which was really wonderful, and a way to kind of expand the accessibility to this trail. Now, that's not to say that there weren't any challenges. I mean, there's boardwalks, and the boardwalks, they're incredible. They whisk you across these marshes, get you through tough areas. They're not always perfect. Sometimes they fall apart. As Kristen mentioned, this goes through dozens of different organizational groups that are maintaining all of these things, which is how we have so many amazing boardwalks through everywhere. But sometimes they fall apart, or sometimes the handrails are exactly at the height of your handlebars, so you are completely unable to ride this very long and beautiful boardwalk. Another interesting thing that we found by the side of the road was Fire Tower. It was actually open for business at the time. Open for business is a weird way to describe a fire tower, but open for business. There was a guy up there scouting for fires, and he was inviting people up to come see how they did it. They've got this cool technique with strings and weights, and this cool thing that they scout along or sight along to see where the fire is. Of course, fire towers are always at the very top of the tallest hill you can find, which is an interesting feature of the Bay Circuit Trail. It seems to find the top of every single hill, and usually the steepest way to the top. Again, it's intended to be a hiking trail, but you are allowed to bike on it, which makes it an interesting and heavy experience. So to address that, when you're preparing for the Bay Circuit Trail, it's important to pack as light as you can to reduce the amount of weight you're hauling over every tree, that you're pushing up every hill, that sort of thing. And everybody has their own special ways of cutting a couple grams here or there. For example, I decided to only bring half of the poles for my tent and use my handlebars as the other pole. And I brought a shorter length pad and just kicked a bunch of pine cones under my feet. It was real comfortable, I promise you. A friend of mine skipped out on poles altogether and brought a hammock. I'm not comfortable in hammocks, but that seemed to work pretty well for him. Again, when you're carrying that bike up the hill, when you're passing it over your head to somebody up a rock, you'll appreciate every little bit of, the hole that you drilled in your toothbrush handle. It'll make a difference, I promise. Another part of this is Galen showed a page there where there were some recommendations for mileage that you might cover under different terrains with different amounts of weight on your bike and that sort of thing. On that page, they were looking at like rough off-road riding. You might expect somewhere in the 25 to I think it was 15 miles a day was the range that they had there. And we were doing about 65 miles a day, which meant that we spent a lot of time riding in the dark. If you're doing that, You need good lights, and I don't particularly actually like riding alone at night in the woods. I find that kind of counter to millions of years of evolution that told me to go be with my other humans, which is why it's really great riding with friends, because that turns night riding from something scary into something really magical. You get to see, you get to ride through towns when nobody's out. You get to ride through the woods where nobody's around. You're following the tunnels go from kind of like a weird, boring thing to these beautiful, light tunnels. And then when you get to camp, you get to set up a pretty little fairy light and pack down, and it's wonderful. Also, something to mention, this is a rough trail. I got a question about whether you could ride this on a recumbent. Certainly parts of this you could. There are some that are paved rail trail sort of things, but a lot of this is really rugged hiking trail. And it will shake your bike to pieces. So you should definitely, as Galen mentioned, possibly even get a tune-up before going out on this and really know how to fix your bike. There's only one bike shop along the entire length of this, and if your bike falls apart, it'll be up to you to put it back together. Otherwise, you're going to have to hop on some transportation and go home, which nobody wants to do. Here, I think we had a cassette that came loose, and nobody brought a cassette tool, but I did discover that you could shove the jaws of a Leatherman into the cassette lock ring to tighten it. And it worked until we got to a friend's house who had the appropriate tools to tighten it. Yeah, going back to, people like to know, what bikes did you ride on the Bay Circuit Trail? We had a whole variety of bikes here, everything from this rigid bike to hardtails to my full suspension mountain bike. Any bike could ride this. It's a very variable trail. There are sections of road that are 10, 15 miles long, and there are sections of really rough stuff where no matter what bike you're bringing, you're going to be hiking, and you'll always wish at some point that you were on a different bike. But I think the general rule of thumb here is the more mountainy of a bike you can bring, the more comfortable you'll be, and the more fun you'll have riding it. Definitely getting to ride as much of the trail as possible is really, that's where the fun is at. So I rode this start to finish. For me, it came out to about 225 miles. I rode it in 3 days, 14 hours, 20 minutes, and I cannot wait to do it again. And I hope that you guys can join me. So that was my experience on the trail. It's not going to be everybody's experience. Every time anybody goes, it's a different time, it's a different place. Everybody who goes is bringing their own histories. Maybe you've got more or less physical fitness than I do. Maybe you've got more or less experience camping in the woods. Certainly, I've heard from my female friends that they don't enjoy being alone in the woods at night. Neither do I. Bring a friend. And I can't speak to everybody's experience for this, and I'm not the one who can tell you exactly how to do all of this. So here's some other resources where you can go. Women Trans Femme Bike Explorers has a bunch of interesting tips there if you're looking for somebody's perspective other than mine. There were some questions about bikepacking during pandemic, how best to do that. Bikepacking.com has a whole section on this where they talk about how to be a responsible traveler during this time. The keys there are to bring all your own food and source all your own water, try to avoid going into stores and that sort of thing. Again, that's all developing, and you should follow local laws and ordinances and recommendations and that sort of thing. Baycircuit.org for anything related specifically to the Bay Circuit Trail. And you're always welcome to email me. I love helping people solve their bike-related problems. Thanks so much. I am really grateful that you guys all came out to hear about this, and we'd love to answer any questions you guys have.
Awesome. Jamie, thank you so much. We've been getting a lot of questions. We get a lot of chatter on the chat as well. So I thank everybody for participating. We have over 100 people on this webinar right now. So
Woohoo!
This is hopefully very inspiring for a lot of you. A couple things I'll point out. So thank you for mentioning the recumbent as well. That's come up a few times. So, make sure that your bike is appropriate for the terrain. There are pieces of the trail that can do a recumbent bike, no problem. But just be aware that you'll want to do your prep work in advance. And I'll also reinforce that some parts of the trail are not open to bicycles, which are indicated on the AMC map. So follow the guidance and please respect the trail designation. We're working on making it from end to end, but in the meantime, it's still in process.
And actually, I have a route for that skips all the closed to bike sections, so you don't have to get halfway down the way and make your way back. There were some questions about camping along the way. We camped at Camp Acton, which is a city-owned camp, I believe. You have to reach out to them specifically, and I think you need to visit them in person to give them your registration fees and all that. There's some tricks there to make that happen, but that's a lovely spot right about, I think it comes out to about 65 miles in if you're starting from the north. And then Rocky Narrows down on the south side is another some 65 miles or so from there. It's another great spot to camp. There are lots of other options also. I think the Bay Circuit Alliance page has an interactive map with lots of camping options listed there, but those are the two that we did that broke it down into 3 days.
Yeah, and just to tack onto that, there's some private land options that are out there. I don't know how many are in Eastern Massachusetts, but there's 2 different sites that I found. One's called Tenter, basically tent with 2 R's.com, and one is called Hip Camp, and they're basically the Airbnb of camping. So somebody will have a lot, somebody will have a backyard, and you can, just like Airbnb, you can search and reserve specific dates, and they're pretty cheap. It's like $30, $35 a night for these places. So along with the public campsites, which may or may not be open right now, or they might be opening up in phases. I don't think anything's open right now currently today, but you can look at Tenter and Hip Camp to see if there's any private options. And I'm sure there's more that are out there.
Galen, if I can add, a lot of town property you can camp on, you just have to ask ahead of time, and Boy Scouts do that a lot. So if you're mapping out your route and your mileage, you can do that. As Jamie mentioned, I've been posting in the chat, there are a number of different ways, in addition to, I think it's Ride with GPS route that Jamie's done, which is awesome, is make sure that you check out, especially if you're planning on camping, the maps of any of the places that you're planning on staying, and especially if you're planning on doing it now. A lot of the Mass Audubon properties are closed, and some of the trustees' properties. So check out the local landowner maps. We do have an interactive map, which I'll give a shout out to UMass Lowell, which some students there actually developed it, and they did look at hotels and camping within, I think, a mile of the trail where you wouldn't actually have to cross a major freeway. So we have the interactive map, we have turn-by-turn guides, and also maps that are on baycircuit.org. And then someone did mention that AMC does sell a 3-map set that's hard paper. I will say that was published a few years ago, and thankfully we made some awesome changes, including this great route that you can do now through Weston, and now you go by through Drumlin Farm. So we've been making some great progress on the trail. So just know that the hard paper map is a little bit out of date. And then as Jamie can attest, there are lots of different things you can find on Ride with GPS, trails blogs, etc., to just like get people's feedback on places they've stayed and like that type of thing. But there is camping along the way. There's a number of different campgrounds like Camp Acton, Harold Parker, and a few others. But again, we're in a pretty suburban, urban area, so it's one of our long-term goals for the Bay Circuit is to create more camping opportunities.
Great, that's awesome. I want to flag one that came in the Q&A from Jonesy that they're going to plan a 12-day tour at the end of this month, which will go through Mass, Vermont, and New Hampshire, which sounds awesome. And they feel the responsible thing is to avoid contact with people best as possible, which means no grocery stores, which I know is tough. So the solution that they're working on is to find people along the route, and they're going to mail food to these people in advance. You just find some friendlies. I don't know how, Jonesy, you're finding these people. Feel free to chime in with like how you're designating that. But this is very similar to how a lot of thru hikers on the AT do it as well, where they know that, they'll pack for a week or 2 weeks and then they'll mail ahead of them, which is especially important on a bike because you want to keep your weight down if you're going to be lugging through some marshlands on the Bay Circuit or elsewise. So you can get creative, and you can find friends along the way who, as Jonesy is going to do, help by letting them camp in their yard. So feel free to get creative out there. If you don't know anybody, there might be some listservs. Now, Jamie, there's a Facebook group that we can point people to as well. Is that the Boss Boss?
Boss Boss is a what does it stand for? Boston Overnight Society or something like that. And they're a group of local bike adventurers that go and do crazy things. You should definitely join them.
Yep, cool. And some good tips there.
We got a question about can you load your interactive map in an offline mobile app? I highly recommend the Ride with GPS app. There's various paid levels of it, but Ride with GPS is such an awesome tool where you can map out planned bike rides. You can download them all for offline use so that you can put your phone on airplane mode and scroll through the map and see the different features there. That's totally invaluable tool. That's how I plan all of my adventures. Even if I eventually put it on a little GPS unit to follow while I'm riding, I always have my phone for the more interactive map if I have more questions about how to figure out how to get around an area that turns out to be closed or something like that.
Great. This chat is a really good chat. I'll make sure I remember to say this chat. I think I know how to do that. But it was pointed out the governor has announced that the phased plan, the campgrounds won't be until phase 2. So right now, if you wanted to go out before phase 2, you're pretty much on your own. So consult with the towns that you'll be going through. And one question that came up, and maybe Kristen, this one's for you. Some trails are dawn to dusk. And does that pertain to the BCT as you know it? And does that mean that Jamie's a scofflaw when he was out at night with his very powerful headlamp?
I guess it depends on your interpretation of what's dusk.
Oh, okay, fair enough.
Can I also address, Galen, a question that someone has in the chat about whether AMC has a stance on through hiking biking? And I think this also relates to the Appalachian Trail, which has been urging people to not go on the trail right now and to do a through hike. I would say that, again, some of the properties that you may go through are closed, so you just need to double check, especially like Mass Audubon, trustees, state forest, that type of thing. I also would say, obviously, we're encouraging people to recreate in their own backyard, but certainly I know that people are going a little bit further afield. So as with all COVID-related things, use your best discretion. And obviously, if there's a place that's pretty crowded, you might not want to go there.
Yeah, very true.
And I don't know if you want to address the mask question, Galen. Someone asked that, and maybe you can talk about the snazzy buffs that Mass Bike has that easily work as a mask if you need to flip it up.
Yeah, most definitely. I was going to do that in my pitch at the end in a few minutes, but for sure.
Okay.
We do recommend, of course, following all the guidelines from the governor and the CDC, which includes right now wearing a face covering. So you might not need to go full mask. I don't necessarily think an N95 mask is appropriate, but any sort of face covering. And of course, just to reiterate, it's because even if you're not symptomatic, you might be a carrier. Any extra layer of protection that reduces the viral load getting out into the world is better. So we do recommend, if you're going to be anywhere close to people, to have a mask. And I'll go grab my Mass Bike buff and tell you how you can grab one of those too. Here's an interesting one for you both that I don't know if there's an answer or not, but do you recommend a certain direction on the Bay Circuit? Do you do clockwise, counterclockwise, if somebody was looking to jump in?
Yeah.
I really like counterclockwise. That's the way we did it. I think it's nominally listed as the start is up north and the finish is to the south. Not that there's a requirement to do it either way, but it flowed nicely in that direction.
Is there a reason why? What do you think that is?
Kristen, do you have any reason for the start and finish?
This is probably history that I would have to dig into of how they decided to make the northern terminus up at Plum Island. I will say, I had this in the chat too. If you look at the turn-by-turn directions, which I do think if you do have a paper map, it can be helpful to supplement technology, is the turn-by-turn directions on baycircuit.org are oriented north to south. So I know people have had sometimes a little challenges, but the markers are up. And I'll also just answer this question I saw about water filling. So there's a lot of water on the Day Circuit Trail. In fact, that might be one of your challenges, especially when we have had a lot of rain. We also have lots of wildlife, including beavers that like to flood the trail. So you can get into some really wet spots. So if you feel comfortable, you can filter water, obviously use your own discretion, but there are lots of little creeks and streams and things like that. In a, I guess, non-COVID time period, I would say we want you to stop at the restaurants, the little convenience stores, et cetera, along the way. One thing we also recommend, there's a ton of libraries, so you could fill up your water bottle there. Obviously, many of these things are closed right now, so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then Karen asks about the pin, which Jamie and I just talked about. If you send an email, I'll just put my email in here. Just you need to let me know that you did the trail via your itinerary, something, just proof that you did it. If you have an essay and some photos to share too, that's awesome. But my email is super easy, ksykes@outdoors.org. We'd love to give out the pins and love to promote when you completed it on our social media. So, and I'm going to be putting a pin in the mail for Jamie tomorrow.
Awesome. Cool. Any other last thoughts before we wrap up?
I'm good on this end.
Okay. Kristen?
Jamie, do you want to put your, I was just going to say, Jamie, do you want to put your email again in the chat?
Oh yeah, I'll put that in the chat there. Absolutely.
Ask you any, and I just have to say, Jamie's been a tremendous resource because I get questions about biking all the time. And so just so appreciative, Jamie. He's always very enthusiastic about entertaining any questions. And one last thing, and I don't know if Isaac is on here as well, but Isaac Wood, who also did the trail with Jamie, is they are expanding, looking at ways you can get from the Boston area out via commuter rail, et cetera, to be able to do bike packing, not just on the Bay Circuit Trail, but lots of other trails. So that's a work in progress too, is looking at more places where you can get out to beautiful hinterlands from Boston and do some bike packing on the Bay Circuit and beyond.
Cool. Cool. Thanks so much. This has been really inspiring. I want to encourage all of you who are listening in that if you are on any trips, have any great photos, that how was your trip on the Bay Circuit? Let us know. You can send it to MassBike, to Jamie and to Kristen, but we'll share as well. So just keep in touch. We're curious as to the tips and tricks that you are finding out there. And of course, everybody's got different needs, different bikes, different levels of comfort. So hopefully our goal is to kind of be a connector to let you know what's going on. And I will make a pitch that we do have more webinars coming up. This is the second in a series that hopefully we're going to be doing weekly, kind of indefinitely while we're stuck at home. And I'll put the next webinar in the chat. It'll be next Wednesday. It's geared towards advocacy. We're going to have national, regional, and local advocates talking about their work. It's a little wonky, but it's how you can get into the weeds on how some of this stuff, the funding, the trail building, the policies, and all that stuff works out. We're going to be hosting the League of American Bicyclists, East Coast Greenway Alliance, Rails to Trails Conservancy, and me here at MassBike to tell you some of our priorities and prerogatives. And I would be remiss to remind you that, if I forgot to remind you, that we are a membership-driven organization. So I would encourage you that if you are already a member, thank you so much. If you have not yet donated to MassBike in this past year, we highly encourage you to do so. You can find it at massbike.org. And if you are a $100 donor or more, we're going to send these lovely buffs to you that you can wear as a face covering. So you can follow the governor's orders. These are kind of special buffs, MassBike branded. They're pretty thin. They work for all seasons, winter, summer, because they're lightweight enough and they're perfect for a face covering as well. So we depend on support from our members. So please, please, if you can give, please do so. We're also looking for volunteers across the state. Kristen's doing a great work in the Connecticut River Valley. They have a lot of fights to kind of coalesce to get all their rail trails up and running, to get the rail trails to be year round, to get funding in places that need it the most, and especially in the recovery from COVID, we're going to need to be relying on bicycles even more so as transit ridership remains low, and we want to keep single occupancy vehicles off the road still. So please keep MassBike in your hearts and your wallets if you do get so inclined, and you can go to massbike.org to find our membership page. And I'll just do a quick screen share before I forget of our next webinar series, which is From DC to Your Block. We'd love to have you there. I'll make sure that this is on front and center on our webpage, but We do appreciate you spending time with us and joining us here. And I want to thank, of course, Kristen and Jamie for sharing your stories. Kristen, thank you so much for the work on making sure the BCT is awesome so that Jamie can rock it. And I'm curious to see where we'll all go next.
Super.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone, for joining.
All right, thanks everyone
Be
for
safe
sticking
out
around.
there.
Yep.
Thanks.
All right.
All right. Bye.